Thanks again for joining us here at Proverb-A-Day. Today we're going to take a look at Proverbs chapter 19. And there's a couple things that jumped out at me here, and one of those is just the importance of wisdom. You'll see in verse 8 that it says, "Those who get wisdom love their own lives. Those who cherish understanding will soon prosper." That wisdom and understanding are going to help us to prosper, and if we love our own life, then we're going to get wisdom. We're going to find that wisdom. It also says in verse 16, it says, "Those who obey instructions preserve their lives, but those who are contemptuous of their ways will die." And so we see here that it's a life or death situation with wisdom, that it's that important that we have wisdom in our lives. Here in verse 18 it says, "Discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death." That if you're not disciplining your children and helping them to get wisdom, then you're actually being a part of them and their death. We see that it's so important that we get wisdom, and we see the importance through these scriptures, and then we see that if we want to get wisdom, that we've got to listen. In verse 20 it says this, it says, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." We see there in verse 20 that if we want to get wisdom, that we've got to listen. We've got to hear people out. We've got to hear the advice that other people are giving to us. And if you're a student out there, I know teenagers, the advice of your parents that you're hearing, you're probably not wanting to hear it. Maybe it's something that you need to do with your homework, or maybe it's something that you need to do with the friends you're hanging out with, and they're giving you advice in a certain situation. And sometimes that's hard to hear. Sometimes that's hard to listen to that advice. But it says that if we listen to advice and we accept the discipline, that at the end we'll be counted among the wise. Or maybe an adult out there and you've got somebody pouring into your life. Maybe it's a peer, maybe it's a pastor giving you advice, and it's hard to hear because it's something that you've got to change in your life. Sometimes listening to advice can be a hard thing, but when we get that advice and we get that wisdom from somebody else, it can help us to become wise and be counted among the wise. In order to listen to advice, a lot of times we've got to humble ourselves. See, I'm newly married. I've been married for about 4 months now, and I'm coming to understand the importance of being humbled and being humble when it comes to this area of advice. Now, I'm not used to having a wife and having a wife giving me advice and having to accept that advice. So maybe you're married out there and you've got a wife or a spouse in your life who's giving you advice, and sometimes that can be hard, and it's humbling to say, okay, you're right. And so as I'm learning as a newlywed here, that the advice that my wife gives me can be really important, and that I've got to make sure that I'm actually listening to it, that I'm actually taking that advice and humbling myself to say, okay, is this good advice? Is this actually what God wants me to hear? Is this really wisdom? And so that humbling aspect of it really can come out there, especially in a marriage where your spouse is giving you that advice. And we've got to be willing to say, hey, you know what? Wisdom is important. I want to have wisdom. I want to understand. I want to have that understanding in my life. And when we do that and we humble ourselves and we say, hey, I'll accept it. Let me check this out. Let me make sure this is really wisdom. This is really helping me to understand. Then that's when God can really move in our lives and help us and show us to become wise people where we're making wise decisions. And so I want to ask you, what is something that God's speaking through this verse to you? There's tons of scriptures here that are saying other things and giving wisdom and things like that. How did chapter 19 speak to you today when you read it? And also, maybe there's a situation in your life, maybe you're newly married or you've been married for a long time, and it's still hard to humble yourself and accept that advice from your spouse. What's that situation in your life where you know that you need to listen more and to hear the advice from that person who's giving you wisdom in your life?